Ready for the interview, and if you get a cue live on the laptop, watch what I'm gonna do. Welcome to the show, let them know we got a point of view. Hey, yo, let's have a combo. Say what you feel, be real, that's the motto. Real talk pronto, Dr. D, PhD, hit an intro. Hold up, wait, gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local. Gotta be social. Network global, a home for the local.
Thank you for being on with me and for in advance sharing this tremendous knowledge about screen time and what we can do about this growing issue in our
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of your origin story related to this work as the screen time consultant.
Yeah. So I started as a classroom teacher, middle school English for 12 years. I was started full time and then went part time when I had my own kids. And what I really witnessed in the classroom from the time I started in 2003 was, no kid had a phone. Social media was non-existent, really. I mean, we were talking about things like Napster and recording music. Like that was sort of the hot button topic back then. And then by the time I left the classroom in 2015, 95% of my students had smartphones. And, I know because I surveyed them. But somewhere around 2012, 2013, what I really started to see was a shift in two areas. One was the student personal device access and social media use. So in the beginning, of course, it was Facebook more was what I was seeing. And the requirement for me as a teacher to move my grading online, put homework online, and the increased use of tech as a teacher. So this is a problem that's been around for definitely more than 10 years, but I think certainly the pandemic and increased use of tech in schools has sort of added fuel to this fire, and made parenting, teaching, learning, and being a kid a lot more challenging. So I started my business in 2018, realizing that this was actually a parenting problem, or I should say a parenting challenge. So what I always say is it's an adult problem that impacts children. It's not a children problem. Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting way of putting that. Because there is a lot of emphasis on children, but
Yes.
for adults, it's a huge problem also.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, we created the products, we provided the kids and the students with the products, and there's certainly that problem of like, well, everybody else is doing it, so therefore I should have it, or this is what kids do now. And, I think we would feel really differently if it was about car keys, for example. Like all the 11-year-olds have car keys. Well, no one I have ever spoken to has ever been like, yes, I'll let my 11-year-old go drive. Right. But we're literally handing kids car keys when we give them unlimited access to the internet.
Yeah, most definitely. And, as a parent myself, and we talked a little bit about this on email before. I think we both have kids that are 12, just
Yes.
around there, right?
Yes.
This is an
Yes, I
interesting
do.
age because I spent so much time, my wife and I, not allowing a phone. Where our
Yeah.
daughter literally just got her first phone,
Yay.
and we waited as long as we thought
Yep.
was appropriate. What drives though the usage much younger than that? What do you think this is about
Right.
parenting that parents go, let's do it at 6, 7, all this stuff.
Right. Well, I always start all of my work and presentations with the quote, replace judgment with curiosity, because
Yeah.
it's so easy to just say, well, you shouldn't do it. Right. I was joking, we're better parents before we have children, like,
Most
how you're going to do it. And then your reality sets in. I really think that for parents of younger children, it's sort of our version of like, oh, it's just like turning the TV on or watching cartoons after school or on the weekend. But the reality is like, it's completely different. I mean, even a generation ago, it was completely different. I think for parents, especially of younger kids, a lot of it's about convenience. I need to get something done. It's just a quick opportunity to distract them. And I'm not judging. I've been there, done that, but what I often feel and see is that it's parents of kids 10 and under who need me and parents of kids 10 and up who find me. And part of that is they don't realize what foundation they're setting when the kids are really young that lead to these huge issues we're seeing around, 10, 11, 12, because it's middle school, it's puberty, it's massive brain changes, and it's also when kids start getting phones and social media. So it's like, I would think of it like an avocado, it's like not ripe, not ripe, not ripe, too late. But it's not too late. I'm an optimist. I think there's always can do, but it makes it a lot harder when we wait to address some of these challenges.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about the brain changes, kind of the mechanics of what
Yeah,
happens when this is introduced, regardless of timeline. But what do phones do to us? This
yeah. Well, I'm not a neuroscientist, so I will say what I do is try to put it in terms that parents can understand. And one of the things, I mean, we know there's a huge amount of brain growth in the birth to 5-year-old window, and there's a similar brain burst and growth and development in adolescence. And sometimes we forget that there is that much brain change happening in adolescence because in that birth to 5 window, we see visibly like a 1-year-old is so fundamentally different from a 4-year-old. But a 10 and a 12-year-old, it's not necessarily as obvious. But in terms of brain stuff, it's big. One of the things we know about the way digital tech today is designed, and I hear this all the time. Well, I watched TV when I was a kid and I turned out fine. It's fundamentally different. Television is non-existent in the way that it used to be. Now we have 24/7 on demand streaming, ad free, paid, it's just so different all across the board. So that's one thing. But what's happening is when we are consuming certain types of digital tech, and I know there's some exceptions, but like we're talking gaming, social media, even streaming platforms, what happens is that they're designed to keep us on as long as possible because that's how technology companies make money. And, that's the business model. It's no judgment. It works. They're very, 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 very wealthy as a result. But the problem is how many of us as adults have sat there at night and been like, I'm just going to watch one more episode. I'm just going to scroll for a few more minutes. And, boom, it's 10 episodes a whole season later, or, 20, episodes of a show, or an hour and a half of scrolling when we wanted to do 5 minutes. The fact that it's a bottomless design, right? That there's no end to where we're scrolling. The fact that streaming platforms autoplay our next episode now, as opposed to clicking play next episode. Those are very subtle design changes that result in our being online longer. What's happening, and this is for adults and kids too, is that our neural pathways are being hijacked, right? And again, I'm putting this in simplified terms. But in general, what's happening is those feel good hormones that make us feel good, like dopamine, we're getting those likes, we're getting the notifications, we're getting comments, we're getting text messages. And, we're like, oh, this is great. I like this. I want to keep playing, or I want to keep engaging in this game. And as a result, we keep playing. And so we do the same action again. It's called the dopamine feedback loop. And what happens though, is our brains adapt. Our brains are amazing, but they adapt. And so then in order to get that same feel good high, if you will, we have to engage it for longer. We have to stay on longer. And so that is what makes this particularly pernicious for young children. Because again, going back to what we know about when brains are fully developed, they're not when they're children. In fact, our brain isn't fully developed until we're well into our 20s or even 30s because of that prefrontal cortex. So to me, that's why, if it's hard for us as adults, how on earth can we expect children to manage this?
most definitely, and it's almost as a very much of like a casino gambling design as well, right?
Exactly.
Designed to keep you on a slot
Intermittent
machine, right?
variable reward. Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Keep pulling you in,
Exactly.
win a little bit. Maybe I can win more.
Exactly.
And I'm seeing this actually in my profession in fitness is now in gyms, more and more people have their phones with them. And but there's we actually we see this in my profession. We go around different gyms and stuff and we talk to different people. And now you're seeing the kind of the crisis, if you will, of people sitting on machines or benches just scrolling in between sets. And the
Oof.
consumers are now like complaining to management. I would like to use this, but there's somebody on here and they're on their phone. So it's like
Wow.
infiltrating. It was different than remember
Yeah.
iPods? Remember iPods?
Oh, yeah. It's just
Those were
music.
great.
I wish
Just
they still
music.
existed,
So they do still exist. You can still buy them, but they're very
but it's hard.
expensive.
The interface is, yeah,
The interface,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
But the problem is
Yeah.
that it's now it's creeping into other things that are
Yeah.
good for us, but it's also keeping those activities now
Yeah.
in a weird position because we're checking stuff. Wow.
Right. Right.
So
Right. That's a really, I didn't think of that shift in that fitness world, but that makes a lot of sense. And also just like what it takes away from in terms of human interaction, right? If we're just constantly scrolling, there's etiquette about being in a gym, right? Or being at a restaurant or being out in public, where I lived in New York City for 3 years, and this is over 20 years ago, but I remember riding the subway into work every morning, and like all these people had different newspapers, like physical newspapers, different languages. And I was like, this is the coolest thing in the world. I'm in this one little subway car and all these people are reading the news in these different languages. Well, what do we see today? Everybody's sitting on the subway car reading their phone. And it might still be those multi-language newspaper stories, but I don't see that. It's like this weird sense of we're all doing the same thing, but I don't feel connected to the people I'm around. Like, I have no idea what you're doing. You could be filming me for all I
That's
know. And
true.
that's
No,
another problem. I bet in the industry you're in as well, like filming people or filming yourself and posting it for that social feedback, right? Like, look at my progress, look at my bodies,
yeah.
look at, which is reinforced, of course, by social media.
Yeah, it's a huge problem actually. And some gyms actually,
Yeah.
interesting, they're creating like social media spaces in gyms where
Oh
if you
my
want to do
gosh.
that, you can just actually I think that'd be I haven't
Interesting.
seen it in practice, but I think it would be very weird to walk into a space like that and just see everybody
Yeah.
filming each other. Like I don't know.
Why not make gyms a phone free place? What would
That's
happen?
a lot of pushback probably.
Yeah. I mean, I would be more interested in a gym that did that. Certainly, at least
Agreed.
from even the filming standpoint,
Yeah.
like feeling vulnerable that someone's going to take a picture of me or film me without my permission. Like, I wonder if it's that thing where like there'd be initial pushback, but I don't know,
Yeah. I think it'd be
interesting.
interesting for that. But I think that we're at a time where I think your work is really
Yeah.
important because I think we're kind of just in the wild west of it where everybody's just doing things. And it's like, well, how do
Yeah.
we deal with this? What's the responsibility of the creators of this technology? Like they're
Yeah.
fundamentally changing who we are. And
Yes.
this, so like, what can we do? So what are some
Right.
tips that you have? I know for parents, it's about parenting, but just in general, what are some high level
Yeah.
things? And then we'll go
Yeah.
down into parenting.
Sure. No, well, my favorite tip to give is high level and everyone can do it. I call it, it's actually an idea I learned from when I worked in a center for children and adults with ADHD and executive function challenges. And it's this concept of living your life out loud. And so initially it was for helping students identify like the steps in a process or what I need to do to complete a homework. I've applied it to screen time. So anytime I reach for my phone, I narrate what I'm doing as I do it. I'm reaching for my phone. I'm going to check the weather. I'm going to see if I need to bring a raincoat. Then I'm checking Google Maps to see how long. And I mean, when you start doing this out loud, you first of all realize how often you're reaching for your phone, how often we get sucked into multiple things when, when you go to your phone to look at one thing and suddenly you're looking at something else and you're like, how did I get here? So we're naming that. There's an accountability piece to it. And when we do it around other people, we're modeling either what we are doing or what maybe we don't want to do. So one thing I noticed, we do it in my house and my husband would go to work and he would say, no one's living their life out loud. Everyone's walking around on their phones and I have no idea what they're doing. And it's suddenly when you become aware of how we're all just head down, it starts to feel really rude. It starts to sort of that social etiquette piece comes back into it. And, there was a time where we thought it was rude to look at your phone in a restaurant,
I
but
know. Yes.
that's long gone, right? Now so getting back to that, right? Like we can change some of these cultural norms by identifying it, and again, I go back to that replacing judgment with curiosity. It's not about shaming people into better behavior because that doesn't work. Shame is never a motivator. So how do you invite the conversation? How do you say, I notice I'm scrolling all the time and I don't want to be? How can we as a family or a couple or a partnership be more intentional about how we're using our tech? And that's my big premise is, I always say I'm not anti-tech and tech intentional. And so for me, that's, really looking at how we're using it. Is it in alignment with our values? Is it prioritizing what we know is best for our mental health, social health, cognitive health? And we're knowing that we're fighting this hijacking dopamine machine, which is not a fair fight.
It's definitely not a fair fight. How would you, I want to get back to something else, but how would you go
Yeah.
into, let's say, a meeting with someone? I've had this experience many times, and you're going to sit down with someone and they have their phone on the table and they're just waiting for a notification. But
Yeah.
is it important to maybe set the scene before the meeting and say, hey,
Yeah.
here's what we need to do? Like,
Yeah, I'm a big fan of front loading things, right? So like setting and this is true for parenting or adult relationships, like setting that expectation ahead of time. When we go out to dinner tonight, the expectation is that no one's going to have their phone on the table, parents included, adults, right? Like, or it's going to be when, hey, I have this thing I would like to try. I'm trying to get better about my own screen use. Could we leave our phones outside the office while we have the meeting? Like, we can keep the meeting shorter, whatever it is. Like, will you help me in trying this? Right. Again, people, I always say it's like, this is so judgy, right? People get so defensive about their screen use because we know we're not great about it, right? We know we could do better. So if it's about, hey, I'm working on this and I need your support, I need your, like, can you help me? Then it's less about blaming someone else or judging someone else. It's saying, can we try this together? So I'm a big fan of that. I think that would be a valuable conversation, and always bringing up as, again, with curiosity, like, what do you think about making our meetings phone free? Like, as a teacher, I remember professional development and staff meeting, everyone's on their laptop grading papers, which I hated. I hated the fact that, I get to gather with my colleagues once a week and this is what we do. Like, this isn't engaging in the real world and it's not modeling it for students. So, and that being said, I know teachers are burned out and overworked. So, anytime they have, I get it. But yeah, it's not ideal.
I like how you just reframed it like, well, what do you think? Or I'm
Yeah.
trying to work on this, and maybe it creates less the judgment or defensiveness from the other person about it like that. It
Yes.
just sounds like reframing that is.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's just a great strategy across the board. I mean, I think, again, this sort of paradox of digital media and online news is like we get driven into these little camps and we feel like we have to stake our flag in it and we can't lose, we got to hold our ground. And I just, that's not healthy for any institution. So how do we kind of get to a point of like, I'm thinking of moving my flag over here a little. What do you think? Right.
Yeah.
Like, together.
So let's get into parenting, which is very difficult
Yeah.
without phones.
Right.
But
Yeah.
with phones, what are
Yeah.
some of your big takeaways or big kind of best practices that we can go over?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, living your life out loud as a parent is invaluable. And I would recommend this for parents of infants all the way up through the teen years, because, one of the things that we want is to model what technology use is going to look like for our kids. And we mentioned taking photos, for example, like how many parents take photos nonstop of their newborn, right? Often posting them. And it sounds ridiculous, but I really encourage parents to ask permission to take their baby's photo. Of course, your newborn isn't going to be like, yes, mom, go ahead. But we're flexing some muscles here, right? To think of a fitness metaphor, like
Yeah.
we're practicing that we ask consent about taking photos and modeling that for our children. And, at some point they're going to be old enough to be like, no, I don't want you to take my photo. And then as a parent, we have to say, okay, I'm putting my phone down, right? That modeling is so important. So that's like from day one, but living your life out loud around it too. So even when we're narrating it around how we use with our kids, like where attention goes, the energy flows. If our faces are down in our phones, guess what our toddlers are going to want? Our phones, right? So thinking about how we use them around them is really valuable. I also think it's just this, my TLDR for what my work is later is better, less is more, relationships first. And no parent has ever said to me, I wish I gave my kid a phone younger. I wish I'd started social media younger. I wish I'd given them more iPad time younger. Never. It's every parent I've talked to has said the opposite. So if I can invite parents listening, like from those who've gone before us, it's hard. And I just recorded a video this morning about like, it's not a simple matter of telling parents, well, just take it away. I mean, you're talking about a device that has become almost an appendage to teenagers at this point, or to the people in your gym, adults, right? Like who are so attached to it that removing it causes its own problems. And so if it were that simple, we wouldn't be here talking. Like there wouldn't be people whose entire businesses are built around helping parents detach from their devices, right? So knowing that you can't just cold turkey it, even if it's what's best for the brain, right? We have to be, nuance is the key word here, right? It's just so much nuance to it. So and just to parents in general, we are going for 80% of the time parenting in a way that aligns with our values. We're not perfect. We're going to mess up. That's normal. And also great modeling for our kids too, that we're imperfect. We can say like, my phone sucks me in. I feel really distracted. I'm going to go put it in the other room right now because I can't be present with you. Kids need to hear that too, that it's hard for us. So yeah, that's just a few ideas. I got a whole book on them.
Yeah, you do. You definitely do. We'll get to that because it just came out in January, right?
That's right. Yes. Yes.
Actually made me think of I was doing a presentation in Washington State, and it was around wellness and stuff. And then we started talking about gym culture and thing. And I said, okay, we're going to try something. I want you to try something here next time you go to the gym. I want you to like try to leave your phone in the locker for 10 minutes. And the funny
Yes.
thing is this audible gasp.
Right.
I'm like,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
45. Like I remember a time without all this,
Me
but a
too.
lot of
I'm
people,
45 too.
right?
Yep.
Everybody else I was speaking to was much younger and they couldn't imagine a time without
I know.
this. So I said, let's
No,
taper
I
this
know.
down. And I said,
Yeah.
we're trying to get into this whole thing's about a wellness conference. This is about getting close to
Yes.
yourself, being close to your body. How could you be
Right.
close to your body if something's distracting you all the time?
Right.
So it's
Right.
the opposite of
Yeah.
what
The
we're trying to
irony.
go for, you know?
Exactly. And, you and I come from a generation that's sometimes referred to as the lucky generation, especially the years where we were born, because we remember an analog childhood. Like, I don't know about you, but it was like outside play, come back when the streetlights come on, like my parents wouldn't necessarily know where I was for a few hours in
Yeah.
the afternoons. There is such value to that. And, what I see today, and it's been trending this direction for the last generation or two, is this fear-based parenting where we are so afraid that the world is a dangerous place that we think we're helping our children by sheltering them, by protecting them, by keeping them indoors and thinking that being online is safer than being in the real world, when in fact, the opposite, right? We're actually, with some exceptions, the world is a safer place than it used to be, right? I mean, certainly in the US. And one of the things I always use this example, Pew research found that the number 3 parental fear in America right now is kidnapping. But kidnapping is statistically almost nil. In fact, somebody did the math. If you wanted your kid to be kidnapped, obviously we don't, but if you did, you would have to stay outside every day, all day for 750,000 years to be guaranteed of being kidnapped. And the problem with these top 3 fears is that the number 1 parental fear is youth mental health, and the number 2 parental fear is bullying. And so what I see parents do is respond to that third fear, kidnapping, by giving their kids phones, because my kid needs to be safe. My kid needs to reach me if something happens. But by giving our kids phones, what do? We make number 1 and number 2 worse, bullying and mental health. So it's this really contradictory set of fears that we have as parents, and what we have to do. And I love the work of Lenore Skenazy and the Let Grow movement. Jonathan Haidt's new book, Anxious Generation, talks a lot about this. The importance of letting kids have these real world experiences actually is what's going to future proof their mental health. So to your fitness example too, like those young adults need to put those phones in the lockers so that they can have awkward experiences at the gym, right? Like
That's what it
life.
is. That's what it
Yeah.
is. It's just like not having silence in between sets or in between intervals. It's like, what do I do with myself? And part of that is like, that's that time you get to just be introspective about how your body's
Yes.
feeling while you're moving it, whatever version of that is. And my wife and I are big proponents of what, like the outside time. We both grew up in the 80s. And I mean, I would be outside for 8, 9 hours and
I know.
not check in with my parents at all. I'm not even
Right.
sure what my
Right.
parents were doing at that time.
I know. I know. And what that freedom that did for our brains and our
Yeah.
social skills and our confidence,
Right.
huge.
And the conflict
Yeah.
you had with other kids, you go to other people's
Yes.
houses. You're saying, when are they going to eat? The kid
Learn.
figures out how to eat. They go to another person's house. They make something
Yes.
there, whatever. My daughter
And
does that.
rules are different.
The
Yep.
rules are
Oh,
different.
that's
Here, we
great.
moved here to Colorado in June, and we
Oh,
picked this
awesome.
neighborhood because it's a super kid-oriented neighborhood.
Awesome.
It's a very 1980s neighborhood. The kids are out for
Love
6,
it.
7 hours playing with each other. no phones, none at all.
Awesome.
And all the
That's
parents are
great.
very vigilant, you know.
That's great. And parents have a lot of work to do to dial back our own anxiety. And of course, what do we know? Our own anxiety is made worse by our consumption of digital media, by our news clickbait headlines and scrolling through social media. Of course, there's always exceptions to these horrific, scenarios about kidnapping or whatever. We get it. But that doesn't mean we need to live our lives in service of this statistically really unlikely scenario. And that's a hard thing to do as a parent because parents also get judged, right? Parents get cops called on parents for letting their kids walk around alone, when in fact that was the norm in the 80s.
Yeah. Everyone was doing that. I mean, it was like, I'd
Exactly.
see my friends
Yeah.
that were all like just wandering the streets, like, just like,
Yeah. Totally. Totally. And I mean, there's actually, and again, Lenore Skenazy's work looks at, they're actually trying to pass legislation, like free range laws in different states that say, you know, letting kids roam is part of healthy childhood. And it's, there's a great line. It's not that we should have kids be as safe as possible. It's just that we should have them be as safe as necessary, right? Like we need to take risks. Again, I think about the young adults you're talking about too, like the risk taking of conversation in the gym, or the risk taking of like being uncomfortable with silence or listening to music you don't want to listen to. Like that is all so important to a resilient adulthood, and now I'm thinking like, can gyms offer, I would love like a phone free gym, but what if it was like a phone free block of time, like where
That's
there
a
was a
good idea.
time period, because you're going to get pushback, but like you might get more people coming in that time knowing phones had to be away, right?
That's
Like,
true.
I don't know. Could be
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, I think there's certainly a growing concern about screen time and what phones are doing, social media, certainly all these things. And it may, in
Yeah.
times in history, things start moving and shifting. If people want things to change, that
Yep.
the culture of the generation starts to make things change. If you look at like Gen Z or just coming up Gen Alpha, they see the world very different.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
very social reform. They're very
Yeah.
anti-discrimination. Like they're moving the
Yeah.
discussion, very
Right.
activist
And that's
based.
great. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think they're mad that their childhoods have been documented digitally without their permission,
You're
right?
so
Like,
right about that. Actually, I've had a lot. I've had so many kids that age say they don't want any part of this stuff. They don't want
yeah.
to be filmed. They don't want to be. They're like the anti-selfie generation.
Yeah.
They don't want any part of it.
Totally. Totally. And the pendulum's going to swing. I mean, I think it is already. And I think a lot of us in my field are sort of tip of the spear with like pushing these ideas that people aren't all ready to hear about, even in the gym, right? Getting rid of the phone seems sort of shocking now. And yet that's what it was 10 years ago. And that's what it could be in 10 years. But I do think there is a momentum. And, for my 12-year-old, like, oh boy, did she want a phone? Has she asked for years? But I always joke, if I were a dentist, we'd eat less sugar, but I'm a screen time consultant. So we talk about screen time all the time.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we are doing right now that's working for us is we share my phone. Now, super annoying. Let me tell you, sixth grade group chat. Oh my gosh. But what powerful teachable moments that's presented for us. She is learning very easily that nothing's private on the internet and in text messages. And so it's not like I'm sitting here reading through all her texts because I have a life too, but I also have to be intentional about my texts because I know she might see them, right? So paying attention to what words I put into writing, and the other thing that I'm trying to make flip phones cool again. That's my hashtag. Because I think if what parents really want is a communication device, I can understand that. And I'd still recommend delaying as long as possible so kids get that real world experience of like, do you know how to take the bus alone? Do you know how to walk in the neighborhood alone? Do you know who to ask for help? Do you know your parents' phone number by heart?
Yes.
Can I just tell you how many kids don't even know their own phone numbers? So many kids. And so those seem like basic skills to just kind of have in place. But then if you want that communication device, the phone does that. You can call me and you can text me. And if that's all you truly want, great. But I also hear parents say like, oh, well, they want to fit in. They're worried about missing out on all the social media stuff. And I get that. I absolutely get that. But that's that cultural norm shift that we have to make. We have to stop giving phones in the name of it because everyone else is doing it, right? Like,
Yeah.
So, we're looking at something called the Light phone, which is a minimalist phone for my daughter, but there's a couple of other pared down flip phones. And I'm not talking about the child-friendly smartphones, these sort of vanity phones for kids. I think those present other challenges. Um, and quite frankly, kids think they're babyish, so they won't use them. They'll find burner phones or they'll sneak a friend's phone. And so I don't know, bring back flip phones and say to your kids, it's okay to be different, because we're right.
It was kind of like when we were growing up. It's like, well, if everybody was going to jump off a bridge, would you do it? And it's like, remember that whole
Exactly.
line?
That's the 80s mom.
The
Amen.
80s mom.
Yep, that's
Yep.
exactly. I know. So, parent like an 80s parent. I feel like there's benefit. Yeah.
There's definitely a benefit that. Well, I think also we're kind of that Gen X generation, which is a really interesting generation because
Yeah.
we've lived on both sides, but it's a very
Yeah.
independent generation. Like
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
by necessity,
Yeah.
you had to fend.
Right.
It's a fend for
Latchkey
yourself
kids.
generation. Yeah, you had to learn how
Absolutely.
to be an adult a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Whereas now
Absolutely.
it's like this adulting. It's like push being an adult back.
Yeah. Yes.
I think
Yes. Childhood is lasting much longer. Kids are hitting milestones much later. Jean Twangy's research is really great at looking. She wrote a book called Generations that looks at all these different changes over time. And, kids are getting driver's license later. They're, delaying premarital sex. They're drinking and doing drugs later. Like there's all these things that were, whether they were healthy for us or not is irrelevant, but they were sort of rites of passage in childhood that are being delayed. And a part of that is a societal norms problem. You think about the places where can kids go to hang out now that, bowling alleys and movie theaters and malls are dying and disappearing because people aren't using them because they're on their phones, right? Like it's this self-fulfilling prophecy. Or you send kids out in the real world and adults are distrusting of them. What are they doing alone in the store? Are they going to shoplift? And so then we become this culture that's hostile to kids' presence. And that isn't good either. And then you have the parent anxiety and the parent helicopter. It used to be helicopter parents. Now it's called lawnmower parents, where you go ahead and mow away obstacles ahead of parents. And that's for ahead of children. And that's not good either. Because to your point, whether it was a good thing or not, we had to learn to be independent, resilient, take care of ourselves. And we're going to remember that childhood. And we're the last generation that's going to remember that. And there's something really poignant about that.
I think so. Something very poignant about it. So let's talk about your book a little bit here. It just came out
Yeah,
January.
it
And
did.
what was it like
Yeah.
writing this book? And how did you feel like you wanted this to? What is the message you want to get out there to people by doing?
Yeah. Well, it's called The Screen Time Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech intentional family. And the reason I titled it Screen Time Solution is because there's a lot of books that highlight the problem. And one of the things I really thought about a lot in writing it was how can this book live on beyond the technological changes that are happening? Because, whatever the hot app is today is not going to be the hot app next year. And so how can I write the book so that it's a tool for parents and non-parents too? I think there's a lot that they could get out of this. How do you navigate this in such a way that you prioritize things like mental health and executive function skills and childhood safety, but not, safe as necessary, not safe as possible. How do we focus on those as parents? So that was really my intention. I wanted it to be like, I'm sitting there with you. I'm talking through it with you. I'm sharing some of my own challenges. I'm talking about some of the generational changes, and I'm providing really tangible solutions. So each chapter ends with little highlights of what you can do right now. So that's the intention behind the book. And I hope it comes across that way.
Yeah, no, it's very certainly how you're speaking about it comes across that way. I mean, I think it's like
Right.
anything. I feel like chaos should not be the strategy for anything.
No.
And I think we've done that with phones. It's like, well, it's just kind of like, especially with parenting, and I work with a lot of clients, and I think, we all struggle in some way with kind of controlling this. And like one
Yeah.
thing we did when we got our daughter phone was like, this has to be checked in and out every night. It
Yep.
gets checked in the morning, gets
Yeah.
checked out. It's just like protecting you, providing an appropriate boundary.
Yeah.
For adults too. I do
Absolutely.
the same thing myself. I don't have
Absolutely.
it anywhere near
Great.
me. I don't want that. I want to sleep. I
Right.
prioritize sleep. It's really
That's
important.
great. Yeah. And, that from a wellness perspective, like how important sleep is, right? And we know that digital tech displaces sleep, especially for children and teenagers. And so, it's the low hanging fruit. And I always say, and I do surveys of school communities I go to, and I always ask the question, how many of you as parents leave your phone in your room at night? And the most recent survey I did was 95% of
Oh
parents
my
admitted
God.
that. 95%. And 10% of them had it on the bed at night.
Whoa.
So yeah. So I just have to say, like, that is low hanging fruit. Get the phone out of the bedroom. At the very least, move it to the opposite side of the bedroom so you can't reach it, right? Like baby steps if you need to. But boy, it's hard to tell your teenager not to have a phone in the room at night if you have one, right? So there's that. I also I'm curious what you think about this as well. Like a lot of tech likes to promote that it makes our lives easier, more convenient, less friction. But what I know as a teacher and a parent, I'm sure in the fitness industry, this is true as well. It's in friction where we see change and growth. We learn when things are challenging or push us beyond our limit just a little bit. And when things are too easy, we stop growing. And so that to me is like so important as a concept for all of us to understand. It's meant to make our lives easier. And in fact, it decreases the friction, which means we stop learning. Do you see that I imagine? Yeah.
Completely. I actually was just in Chicago doing a presentation on, it was basically about like, if exercise is so good for us, why is it so hard to do? So we go through this big
Yeah.
biological
Ah,
and anthropological research related to it. But
yes.
one of the parts was about we asked the question, have we over optimized society in developed countries? Sorry.
Yes.
And are we at the point where like, it's too easy? So when it
Yes.
becomes too easy, you become extremely demotivated to actually
Yes.
overcome anything. And
Right.
that's what I think the phones have done. And all this, it's like made life almost too easy and well-to-do
Yeah.
nations. So it's
Yeah.
demotivating the
Absolutely.
population, actually. It's not motivating people
I
to do
agree.
better.
No, and if I can add another layer of complexity to that, look at how much technology we're giving out in the name of education
Right.
in the classrooms. And so what's going to happen is not that, and let me again be clear, I'm not anti-tech. I think there are some incredible ways we can use technology for educational purposes, but we are not doing that currently. We are over inundating classrooms with tech. We are relying way too heavily on digital tools for teaching and learning. And kids are going to find the least friction path out. To a child, an iPad is a toy. It is not a tool. And so that is a huge concern to me. I think there is increasing awareness of that problem. And there's lots of problems with digital tech in school, including data and privacy violations and all of that. But, parents used to send their kids to school thinking that was the screen-free place. Like, okay, maybe I'd struggle at home in the afternoon school hours. Kids are on their devices at school, sometimes 4, 5, or 6 hours a day. So we're talking additional now. And we are interfering with brain development. And of course, again, kids are going to go straight to Google to find the answer. They're not going to use the learning app that you wanted them to learn because it requires friction. And that is not how we are wired. So it's just fundamentally a contradiction to me that we're pushing this so much, so fast, so young.
Yeah. And I think the creation of these tools, while I do like them, is that we often create without creating boundaries within it.
Right.
Everything
Right.
humans create, I feel, is always done without boundaries. It's like,
Mm.
we can do it. Let's just do it. We'll figure it out.
Right.
It's the whole
Right.
it's the whole Silicon Valley old mantra, like just break things and deal with it
Yep.
later.
Move fast and break
Move
things.
fast and
Yep.
break. And I never was into that because I thought, well, that doesn't make sense to me, actually.
There's
Like,
no
no one
sustainability in that.
right.
Yeah.
No one thrives off of chaos over a long period of time. Like it just doesn't
Right.
work.
And you wouldn't tell a fitness client to move fast and break things, right? Like,
No,
can you
no.
imagine? Right? You want to
Right.
set them up for a lifetime of wellness, and that's going to have the opposite effect. So it's a really, really applicable point. And
Yes. Strange.
that's not
strange
how
way to-
children work.
No.
Yeah.
No.
No.
And I think always trying to remember my advice to other parents too is, listen, I'm certainly not a perfect parent. No one is, but it's like,
Nope.
this person will be an adult one day and
Yeah.
they're going to remember all this and it's going to shape them. How do you want them to be? Isn't the goal that they're a very well adjusted adult? I mean,
Yeah.
they're not going to be kids. They will not be kids forever. In fact, it's the shortest amount of time in your life with them will be this time. Like,
Right. I know. I agree. And again, that's like it's hard to think about that when you're in the moment, when it's just so easy. It's just here. I can just reach for it. It's like always nearby. It keeps them quiet. They seem to be happy. And yet, to your point, it's what, 20% of their life
I mean, it's a
is,
very short amount of time. And
yeah,
then you think like very like attentive parenting is almost punitive for the parent in a way.
yeah,
It was harder.
exactly.
Being like
Yeah.
a attentive parent is actually makes your life harder in many ways, you know.
Totally, totally. And it's the message again, it's sort of that damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because if you're a parent who doesn't want to hover and over monitor, which isn't healthy for kids,
Right.
then does that mean kids are getting up to things they shouldn't on the internet, which does happen all the time? On the other hand, with the internet, it's totally it changes the parenting game, right? Like this is unprecedented. This is not something any previous parenting generation has had to deal with. And I just, I have I always say it's not parents' fault, but it's our responsibility to address it and push back and resist and fight cultural norms that tell us we should do things one way when we know that's not what's best for kids. So, or for us for that matter.
Okay. Yeah. Anytime you introduce something novel into an environment that there is no previous, like there's no precedent for it, you're gonna get a
Yeah.
lot of like craziness. And
Yeah.
it's just you
Yeah.
just don't know how to deal with it for that.
No. And the algorithm feeds on chaos, right?
Yeah.
So that's the part where, if we go real meta here, no pun intended, it's like, I see this as a threat to democratic institutions, right?
Yeah.
Like if we are being fed and we know negativity bias, like we know that what is negative gets more clicks, gets more shares, that's just becomes the sort of echo chambers of our society. And again, all the more reason to find phone-free places to encourage human interaction in real life when we can, because that's dangerous. I mean, I don't want to sound prophetic in that sense, but
Yeah.
I think it scares. It does scare me. And, we've got AI coming down the pike too, which is just another
Okay. I wanted to talk to you
challenge.
about this as well as kind of our last piece here. How
Yeah.
can what are going to be the solutions, these future solutions
Yeah.
for augmented reality and eventually a
Yeah.
society where uh, virtual reality will be indistinguishable from physical reality?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. It's mind-boggling, but we're on our way to that, and it's already in some places. I see AI tools already being pushed in elementary school or in the name of helping teachers with burnout and excess class sizes, and it makes me angry beyond belief. The thing about, the thing about AI is I think we have misguided. We're worrying about the wrong thing sometimes. I think a lot of people worry about, oh, it's going to lead to more cheating. That's like not even, that's the least of our problems at this point, right? And to me, the solution or the antidote is what I think is my tech intentional approach, which is prioritizing the skills before the screens. Like this is all the more reason to get screens out of elementary and middle school, especially so that we prioritize critical thinking. Like to me, that's the solution. And, we are not prioritizing that with digital tech. Again, it can be a tool that we use for specific purposes within the context of a learning environment that is regulated and monitored by a teacher, but it is not done in the name of iPads for kindergartners and laptops for third graders. And so critical thinking, absolutely. Perspective taking, empathy, all of those executive function skills, that is the antidote. And on top of that, we have to have the media literacy piece, the education that schools are going to have to start teaching about mis and disinformation and how, when ChatGPT doesn't know the answer, it just makes it up for you, which is
right.
really convenient because it's frictionless, right? Again, it's like, here we go. So that educational component is what it comes back to. And, I'm a teacher at heart, so that's my passion and where I believe most influence will come. But whew, it's scary. It is scary. And government regulation on top of that, just to throw in another small detail, right? Like governments are very slow to make legislative changes. And, sometimes that's a good thing, but tech moves so much faster than anything else. I call it digital whack-a-mole. You're like,
Yeah.
hurry up and catch up and fix something that happened rather than think proactively and preventatively. And
Yeah.
like you said, that's not how it works, right?
That's just not how it works. I mean, even like recently
No.
when they had different heads of social media companies in Congress,
Oh,
and there
yes.
were
I
parents,
watched
right, who
that.
were
Yep.
upset, and then Congress individuals basically saying, "How dare you?" and all that stuff. And it's a big show, But I thought to myself, well, what will actually happen to this? I haven't seen anything.
Right.
Like, what's the actual
Yeah.
like
There's
movement?
the kid. Yeah. The Kids Online Safety Act is getting a lot of attention right now as a way of, protecting kids online. I mean, again, it's like some of these senators have been working on this for years and it's been watered down because of special interests. But, the thing I will say, and a lot of activism I do, the thing I find inspiring is it's actually a very nonpartisan issue in a
Yeah,
world that
that's true.
feels hyper partisan. Whether you come to it because you're worried about porn or violence or bullying or time on or your eyeballs or health or your brain health, it doesn't matter. It's like, I do think there's a common goal of like protecting children. And that's
Yeah.
a good thing. Like, I want to emphasize that, what is it? Politics makes strange bedfellows, right? So
Yeah.
it's okay if, and I actually think there's good things about reaching across the proverbial aisle to
Yeah.
find allies who can, push for better accountability. And, at the end of the day, like, yeah, it's America. Yeah, it's capitalism, but these tech companies are profiting off of children. And I fundamentally, at the end of the day, think it's a business model that has to change. And that's going to be a real uphill fight.
It's a big uphill battle. Big time.
Yeah,
for
but
sure.
I'm willing to fight it. As someone said, it was like,
Yeah.
it's David. I said David and Goliath, and they told me, yeah, but Emily, David won. So
Yeah, that's right.
that's where I'm at.
Well, that's a great way to end this off. I really appreciate your time, Emily. I mean, it's
Mhm.
such an important topic. And please let everybody mention the book again and how they
Yes.
learn more
Yeah.
about.
So it's The Screen Time Solution, a judgment-free guide to becoming a tech intentional family, available everywhere books are sold. My website is thescreentimeconsultant.com, and I post a lot of stuff on social media. I recognize the irony of that. I have an assistant who helps me. But I do write weekly essays about parenting and screen time, and a couple essays about AI and education. And so if you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get those weekly essays, which also eventually become blog posts. So there's a lot of content available to people there as well. So please sign up and give me a follow and share about the book and post a review if you like the book, because that helps the algorithm.
Definitely helps the algorithm. And this episode will be out very quickly. And I think we'll do a lot of good for
Great.
all
Thank
of
you
us
so much.
parents. Yeah. And adults, just adults in general.
Yes.
For that.
Yeah, and keep me posted on your fitness and phone-free zones. I think there's something really interesting
Yeah, there's something
there.
there.
Could
Definitely.
be cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciated being here in our
Thank
conversation.
you, Emily. I appreciate it. We'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.